Imagine building a life with someone for 3 decades, only to discover they've been keeping a secret that could shatter everything. 30 years of love, 30 years of trust, 30 years of shared dreams, anniversaries, and promises whispered late at night. To the outside world, they were the perfect couple. People admired them, envied them even. A love story that had stood the test of time. But sometimes, what looks perfect from the outside hides cracks so deep, you don't notice them until it's too late. It was supposed to be the happiest night of their lives, their 30th wedding anniversary. The restaurant was dimly lit, golden with candlelight. A single violin played in the corner. Their table was dressed with white linen, red roses, and a bottle of champagne chilled on ice. He smiled at her, proud, grateful, thinking he had chosen right all those years ago. She smiled back, but her eyes told a different story. And here's the question. What kind of secret could survive 30 years of marriage? What kind of truth could sit silently between two people, hidden through children, birthdays, holidays, and every fight, every kiss, every moment in between? And why? Why choose this night of all nights to finally let it out? Because that's the thing about secrets. They don't disappear. They don't die. They wait. Patiently. They wait until the perfect moment to break free. And when they do, they don't just hurt. They destroy. He thought the evening was about celebration, about honoring the love they had built. But for her, it was something else entirely. For 30 years, she had carried a truth too heavy to speak, a truth that had eaten away at her in silence. And now, she was ready to release it. No matter the cost, the clink of glasses, the laughter of strangers in the background, the smell of rich food on silver trays, it all played like a soundtrack to a moment that would end everything they had ever known. And here's where the storm begins. Betrayal, heartbreak, injustice. He had no idea that this dinner wasn't just an anniversary. It was a breaking point. A confession decades in the making. You see, every smile hides a story. Every marriage has its shadows. But sometimes, the shadows are darker than we can ever imagine. This wasn't just going to hurt him. This secret would rewrite his entire past. It would force him to question every memory, every decision, every piece of love he thought was real. And while he believed he was stepping into the happiest chapter of their lives, she was preparing to open a door that would change everything forever. That night, one anniversary gift would end up changing their lives forever. They had been married for 30 years. 30 long, full, complicated years. To everyone around them, they were the picture of commitment, the couple that others pointed to and said, "That's what real love looks like." Friends admired them. Neighbors respected them. Their children, grown now with lives of their own, saw them as the steady anchor that held the family together. They weren't flashy. They weren't dramatic. They were stable, reliable, a love story that had lasted through the storms of time, and it all began, as so many stories do, with young love. He met her when they were barely more than kids. She was shy, but her smile lit up a room. He was confident, a little reckless, but deeply devoted once his heart was caught. They dreamed together dreams of a house, of children, of a life built hand in hand. And piece by piece, brick by brick, they made those dreams come true. There were struggles, of course. Every couple has them. Money was tight in the beginning, nights when they argued about bills, days when exhaustion from work and parenting pulled them in opposite directions. But every struggle seemed to make them stronger. Or at least, that's how it felt to him. From his perspective, their marriage was unbreakable. He trusted her completely. To him, she wasn't just his wife. She was his partner, his confidant, the one person in the world he believed would never let him down. He looked at their life and saw loyalty, stability, and love that had stood the test of time. But her perspective was different. If you looked closely, closer than anyone ever did, you might notice it. The moments of silence that lasted a little too long. The way her smile sometimes faltered when he wasn't looking. The occasional distance in her eyes, as if she was somewhere far away, thinking about something she couldn't share. He never questioned it. He thought she was tired, or distracted, or simply carrying the weight of everyday life. He never imagined there was something more. He never asked what shadows lived behind her smile, and maybe that was the problem. The contrast between them was sharp, even if no one else noticed. His trust was blind, total hers. Hers was burdened by a truth she carried alone. A truth that pressed on her every day, but one she locked deep inside. Choosing silence over confession, still life moved forward. They built traditions together. Every year, on their anniversary, he planned something special. Sometimes it was a trip, sometimes just a quiet dinner at their favorite place. And every year they would look back at how far they'd come, thanking each other. Celebrating the milestones, toasting to the years ahead, it became a ritual. A marker of time. Proof, at least to him, that their love was still strong. And now, 30 years? The milestone anniversary? The one that everyone said was rare, sacred, almost untouchable. 30 years was supposed to mean they had beaten the odds. That their love was something eternal. So he planned the celebration with pride, with excitement, with gratitude. He thought it would be a night of laughter, of warm memories, of promises renewed. He thought they would leave that dinner more in love than ever before, but she carried a different intention into that night. Because for her, 30 years wasn't just a milestone. It was a limit. 30 years of silence. 30 years of pretending. 30 years of hiding a truth too heavy to carry any longer. Her quiet moments, her distant stares, her subtle unease, they weren't just passing moods. They were cracks in the foundation of the life they had built. Cracks he never noticed. Cracks she covered with practiced smiles. And now, on the night of their 30th anniversary, those cracks were about to split wide open. But what he didn't know was that every year, behind her smile, she carried a truth too heavy to speak. The cracks were small at first. Easy to miss, a hesitation when certain names came up in conversation. A nervous laugh when he asked about stories from her past. A quick change of subject whenever memories drifted too close to something she clearly didn't want to revisit. He brushed it off in the beginning. Everyone has topics they don't like to talk about, right? Everyone has memories they'd rather leave behind. And after all, 30 years together had taught him to pick his battles. If she didn't want to talk about something, he wouldn't push. He trusted her, but trust doesn't silence curiosity forever. Sometimes, late at night, he would remember those small moments. The way her hand trembled just slightly when he asked about an old friend. The way she avoided eye contact when he pressed her about where she had been during a certain weekend years ago. At the time, the excuses made sense. But when you string them together over decades, they begin to form a pattern. He told himself it was nothing. Just stress. Just the weight of raising children, working, running a household, maybe even age. After all, 30 years changes people. And he didn't want to seem paranoid. He didn't want to doubt the woman he believed had given him her entire heart. But doubt has a way of seeping in. It's slow and quiet until it's too loud to ignore. Flashbacks lingered in his mind. He remembered the early years when he'd ask her about her old relationships. She'd always answer quickly, too quickly. Almost rehearsed. He remembered the time a letter arrived in the mail, one she grabbed before he could see. She laughed it off, saying it was junk. But why had her hand shaken when she tore it up? He remembered the phone calls she used to take in the kitchen, lowering her voice until it was barely above a whisper. At the time, he thought nothing of it. Now, in hindsight, every little detail carried a weight he couldn't explain. And while his mind toyed with suspicions, at that, her heart was drowning in guilt. Every year that passed, the truth grew heavier. She tried to bury it under routines, under laughter, under the safe, predictable rhythm of family life. But it was always there, always pressing at the back of her mind. Sometimes, when she looked at him, she wondered how he would react if he ever found out. Sometimes, when she kissed him goodnight, she felt the sting of shame. And yet, she couldn't bring herself to tell him. Because telling him meant destroying the life they had built. Telling him meant risking everything, so she stayed silent. But silence comes with a price. As their anniversary approached, her behavior began to change. Subtle at first, but noticeable. She grew restless, distracted. She snapped at small things that never bothered her before. She lingered in thought, staring off into space, her eyes clouded with worry. He noticed. Of course he noticed. One night, a week before their anniversary, he asked her, "Are you okay?" She smiled quickly, too quickly, and said, "I'm fine. Just tired." But her voice was strained. And for the first time, he felt something he had never felt in their marriage. Unease. He couldn't shake it. The tension grew thicker with each passing day. He tried to tell himself it was nothing. Tried to drown his doubts with logic. But deep down, Something inside him whispered that a storm was coming. And maybe he didn't want to admit it, but part of him was afraid. Afraid of what he might hear if he asked the wrong question. Afraid that the perfect marriage he believed in wasn't as perfect as it seemed. The narrator's voice cuts in. 30 years is a long time. Long enough to build a life. Long enough to raise a family. Long enough to believe in forever. But it's also long enough to bury a secret. And no matter how deep it's buried, the truth has a way of finding its way back to the surface. So the question hung in the air unspoken. Unanswered. What kind of secret could survive 3 decades of marriage? What could be so devastating, so dangerous, that she chose silence for 30 years rather than confession? As the night of their anniversary drew closer, she grew more anxious. He grew more suspicious. And the weight of 3 decades pressed harder, heavier, until it was impossible to ignore. The truth was closer to the surface than ever before. And he had no idea. The restaurant was everything he had hoped it would be. Soft music, golden candlelight, the gentle hum of laughter from other tables. Their children had sent flowers that rested in the center of the tabbouleh, proud declaration of 30 years of love and commitment. He sat across from her, his eyes warm, his heart full. To him, this was a celebration. A victory. 30 years together, and still here, still strong. He reached across the table and squeezed her hand. She smiled back, but her hand trembled in his. She looked beautiful that night. Her dress was elegant, her hair done just the way he liked it. To anyone watching, she seemed radiant, glowing with joy. But if you looked closer, if you really studied her, you would see the truth. Behind the smile, behind the laughter. There was tension, restlessness, a storm barely contained. Dinner passed with stories, with shared memories. They laughed about their first date, about the house they bought together, about the chaos of raising kids. He gave her a small velvet box inside, a necklace engraved with the date of their wedding. She gasped, tears filling her eyes. He thought they were tears of joy, but they weren't. When the waiter poured champagne and he stood to make a toast, his voice was filled with gratitude. He spoke of love that had lasted, of sacrifices made, of memories cherished. Guests nearby clapped, some even wiped away tears. He raised his glass high. She raised hers too. And just for a moment, their eyes met across the candlelight, his full of pride, hers full of something else entirely. When the toast ended and the glasses were set down, she leaned forward, her voice soft. "Can we talk? Just the two of us." His heart leaped. He thought maybe she had planned a surprise. Maybe she had something special to share. A gift, a secret trip, something that would make this night even more perfect. He nodded eagerly. The waiter cleared the table. The music played on. But at their small corner table, the air shifted. It grew heavy, almost suffocating. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. She looked down at her hands, twisting the napkin until it nearly tore. He frowned. "What is it?" he asked gently. Silence. She tried again, her voice cracking this time. "There's something I need to tell you," he smiled faintly, still oblivious. "What is it?" Another pause. Another silence so thick, it pressed against them both. And then she said it. The truth. She had carried for 30 years. Her words were slow, deliberate, heavy. She confessed to something that shook the very foundation of their marriage. Here, the secret can be flexible. Perhaps the child he raised as his own was not his by blood, or that she had hidden a long affair, or that a part of their shared history had been built on a lie. Whatever the exact truth, its weight was crushing. At first he didn't understand. The words didn't make sense. They bounced around in his head like echoes in an empty room. He blinked, trying to piece them together, trying to reconcile what he was hearing with the life he thought he knew. But then it hit him, and when it did, his entire world collapsed. 30 years. 30 years of anniversaries, of family vacations, of holidays, of late-night conversations. 30 years of sacrifice, of trust, of devotion. And now, every single one of those years felt poisoned. He stared at her, his mouth dry, his chest tight. He wanted to speak, but no words came. He wanted to ask why, but his voice refused him. Her eyes filled with tears. She reached across the table, desperate. "I never wanted to hurt you," she whispered. "I thought I was protecting you." But to him, those words were meaningless. It wasn't just the secret itself. It was the time. The years, the decades, she had let him live in ignorance, believing in something that wasn't true. That was the betrayal. Not just what she had done, but how long she had let him believe in a lie. The restaurant faded away. The music, the laughter, the flicker of candles, it all blurred into the background. In that moment, it was just him, her, and the crushing weight of the truth. He sat in silence, his face pale, his hands shaking, his heart broken in a way that could never be undone. And she waited. She waited for him to speak, to shout, to cry, to do anything. But he said nothing. Because what do you say when 30 years of your life has just been rewritten? The betrayal was complete. And in that moment, 30 years of trust collapsed in an instant. 4 days he lived in silence. The truth she confessed on their anniversary echoed through his mind like a bell that refused to stop ringing. At first, it was devastation, pure, unrelenting heartbreak. He couldn't eat. He couldn't sleep. Every memory they had shared replayed itself, but now with a question mark stamped over it. Was any of it real? Had she ever loved him? Or had it all been a performance, a cover for the secret she carried? The pain was unbearable, but pain has a way of changing shape. And slowly his sorrow hardened into something else. Determination. He thought about the years he had given her, the sacrifices he made, the late nights at work to provide for their family, the moments he chose her happiness over his own. 30 years of loyalty, of trust, of devotion. And this was what he got in return? A lie that unraveled everything? At first, anger tempted him. He could have shouted. He could have packed his bags and left. He could have torn their life apart in a single outburst. But he stopped himself. No, that would be too easy for her. She needed to feel the weight of her choices. Not for a day. Not for a week. But for the rest of her life. So he made a decision. He would not explode in fury. He would not storm out. He would not give her the satisfaction of seeing him broken. Instead, he would plan carefully, quietly, patiently, and that's when the revenge began. He pretended to carry on as usual. He ate dinner with her. He spoke to her kindly. He even kissed her goodnight. On the surface, nothing had changed. To her, it seemed as though the storm had passed. Maybe she thought he was going to forgive her. Maybe, she thought, their marriage could somehow survive. But behind the scenes, he was plotting. He started by retracing the details of her confession. Every word, every gap, every hesitation. He remembered moments from the past, those small inconsistencies he had dismissed. Now, they became clues. Threads he could pull on. He checked old records, bills, letters. He looked through photographs, finding details he had overlooked before. He asked subtle questions to people from their past, people she thought he would never speak to again. And piece by piece, the puzzle came together. The more he uncovered, the more furious he became. Not outwardly, he never showed it. But inside, his rage grew sharper, more precise. The betrayal wasn't just what she confessed. It was the realization that he had lived 30 years in a story she had written. Not the truth he deserved, but this wasn't just about his pain anymore. This was about justice. He didn't want to destroy her violently. That wasn't his style. He wanted something far more devastating. He wanted her to lose the very thing she valued most, the life she had built on lies. And so his plan formed. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't reckless. It was deliberate, calculated. He would let her believe the worst was over. He would let her think the secret was out, that her confession was the end of it. She would relax, relieved, maybe even hopeful that they could move forward. And then, when she least expected it, he would strike. Because her punishment wasn't going to be his anger. Her punishment was going to be exposure. The mask she had worn for 30 years was about to be ripped away, not in private, not in silence, but in front of the people who admired her. Most family, friends, community. Everyone who thought she was the perfect wife. The loyal partner, the devoted woman, he would show them who she really was. Every lie she told, every secret she buried, every betrayal she confessed, it would all come to light. And when it did, she wouldn't just lose his trust. She would lose her reputation. Her pride, her carefully crafted image, that would be her greatest punishment. And so he prepared. Step by step, gathering the evidence, rehearsing the reveal, making sure that when the moment came, there would be no escape. No denial, No way for her to twist the truth. To her, the confession was the end. But to him, it was only the beginning because she thought the secret was out. But she had no idea what he was about to do with it. The setting was perfect. Or at least that's what she thought. A month after their anniversary dinner, their children had insisted on hosting a family gathering to honor their parents. 30 years together was no small thing after all. Friends, relatives, even neighbors were invited. The living room was decorated with golden streamers, framed photos of the couple through the years, and a cake topped with the words forever and always. She stood at the center of it all, smiling, accepting hugs and congratulations, her laughter ringing through the air. She thought the worst was behind her. She thought her confession, painful as it had been, was done. The secret was out, and though it had hurt him, hey, maybe, just maybe, he was moving forward after all. Hadn't he been calm since then? Hadn't he treated her kindly just as before? She let herself believe it. She let herself hope. But what she didn't know was that every kind word, every smile, every moment of silence from him was part of a plan. A plan that was about to unfold before everyone she loved. The moment came when their eldest child raised a glass. To Mom and Dad, they said proudly, for showing us what real love looks like. 30 years and still strong. Applause filled the room. She beamed, her eyes shining with pride. But he remained quiet. His hand tightened around his glass. His jaw clenched. And then, slowly he stood. The room quieted. All eyes turned to him. He began softly, his voice calm, steady. 30 years is a long time, he said. A long time to share memories, to build a family, to create a life together. Everyone nodded, smiling. His words sounded like the beginning of a heartfelt speech. But then, his tone shifted. But 30 years is also a long time to hide the truth. The air froze. She looked up at him, her smile faltering. He continued, his voice gaining strength. I thought we had honesty. I thought we had loyalty. I believed in what we built. But what I didn't know was that behind every anniversary, behind every smile, behind every word, there was a lie. Gasps rippled through the room. Eyes darted between them. She shook her head slightly, panic flashing across her face. Please, she whispered. Not here. But he didn't stop. He told them everything. The secret she confessed. The details she had hidden. The truth she thought would stay buried forever. And not just her words, he revealed the evidence he had gathered. The threads he had pulled together. Documents, dates, facts that could not be denied. The room erupted with shock. Their children sat frozen, disbelief written on their faces. Friends muttered, stunned, some covering their mouths in horror. Neighbors who had admired her looked away, ashamed for her. And her carefully built image, her reputation as the perfect wife. The devoted partner it shattered right there in front of everyone. Tears welled in her eyes. She tried to speak, but her voice failed her. She reached for him, desperate. We can talk about this later, please. But he pulled his hand away. The betrayal she caused now came back to her multiplied. It wasn't just him who knew now. It was everyone. Everyone she cared about. Everyone she had tried so hard to impress. The weight of 30 years of silence came crashing down in a single night. Not just breaking her marriage, but breaking the image she had spent her life protecting. The children looked at her differently now. With disappointment, with confusion. One of them asked quietly, "Is it true?" She couldn't answer. She could only sob, the truth crushing her completely. He didn't yell. He didn't rage. He didn't need to. His silence, his calmness was louder than any anger could have been. He had taken back control not just of his life, but of the story she had written for 30 years. When the room fell silent, he placed his glass down on the table. He looked at her one last time, his voice quiet but cutting through the heavy air. For 30 years, she held the truth. In one night, I gave it back to her. And it destroyed her. Then he walked out. Head held high. Dignity restored. Leaving her speechless, surrounded by the wreckage of her own lies. The night of the gathering became the turning point. After the truth came out, nothing was ever the same again. She was left standing there, trembling, surrounded by faces she once believed would always admire her. But admiration had turned to shock. Trust had turned to disappointment. And the silence in the room was louder than any accusation. In the days that followed, she found herself alone. Calls went unanswered. Friends who once filled her home with laughter now kept their distance. Even her children, confused, heartbroken, couldn't look at her the same way. The bond she had relied on was fractured, maybe forever. She had spent 30 years protecting a secret, believing silence would keep her life intact. But in the end, that silence had cost her everything. Meanwhile, he began to rebuild, slowly, carefully. At first, it wasn't easy. He woke up in an empty bed. He ate breakfast alone. He walked through rooms that still held memories of her laughter, her presence, her touch. The weight of betrayal lingered like a shadow he couldn't shake, but freedom has a way of bringing clarity day by day. He began to find strength. He reconnected with old friends. He spent more time with his children, not as a husband trying to maintain appearances, but as a father who was finally honest about his own pain. He discovered a new independence, one that had been buried under years of blind trust. It wasn't a quick recovery. Healing never is. But every step he took without her was a step toward reclaiming himself. And for her, the opposite was true. Regret consumed her. She replayed the moment of her confession over and over in her mind. She remembered the look in his eyes when he realized what she had done. She remembered the silence that followed, the silence that spoke louder than any words could. She thought she was protecting him. She thought silence was mercy. But all along it was poison. The passage of time made the contrast even clearer. He grew stronger, lighter, freer. She grew smaller, lonelier, trapped in the cage of her own choices. And the narrator's voice reminds us, justice doesn't always come fast. Sometimes it takes years, decades even. But it comes. And when it does, it arrives with a weight no one can escape. 30 years. 30 years of love, of lies, of silence. And in the end, the truth didn't just come out, it tore everything apart. Because his new life was about truth and freedom. Hers was about loss and reflection. And so the story closes with one final line. The truth waited 30 years. And when it arrived, it tore everything apart. So what do we take from this story? The truth, it always comes to light. No matter how deep you bury it, no matter how long you keep it hidden, the truth waits. Sometimes for years, sometimes for decades. But it doesn't disappear. And when it finally breaks free, it doesn't just wound. It destroys. This was never just about her secret. It was about the silence that followed. The lies woven into everyday life. The choice to let someone live in a false reality for 30 years. That is the real betrayal. Because betrayal isn't always loud. It isn't always obvious. Sometimes it's a smile hiding a shadow. A hand holding yours while keeping something back. And those are the betrayals that cut the deepest, the ones hidden in plain sight. She thought silence was protection. She thought burying the truth meant saving him from pain. But silence has a cost. And that cost came due the moment she confessed. She didn't just lose his trust, she lost everything. Her reputation, her family's respect, her image of herself. He, too, lost something. He lost years, decades that could never be returned. But he also gained something far more powerful. He gained clarity, freedom, control over his own life. Because once the truth was revealed, he wasn't living in someone else's story anymore. He was living in his own. And that's the contrast. She chose silence, and it cost her everything. He chose truth, and it set him free. Secrets are like shadows. The longer they linger, the darker they grow. And when they finally stretch too far, they consume everything in their path. So remember this. If you build love on lies, it cannot stand. Time may hold it together for a while. But one day, one moment, one slip, and everything will crumble. In the end, love cannot survive on lies. And sometimes, the truth is the most powerful revenge of all.